We know that if you have a very well-defined ICP and you know them extremely well inside out and you address them in a certain kind of way, you're going to be incredibly efficient in terms of marketing CAC and sales CAC. And so all of the product dollars that you've spent is going to get consumed more by customers and generate revenue. And that's your starting point. Now, of course, when you then go and speak to the VCs, you then want to be able to communicate that you can then broaden out into this generalized market that is very, very big. And so I think founders also get lost between the 2 points. And, that's why, in many regards, why we started to really sort of noodle down on this kind of super niche investing, because, there are so many incredible businesses that don't get VC money that are incredible. They're highly efficient. The CAC's amazing, both on sales and marketing, and the customers love them. What happens is you get this word of mouth. You get these super consuming customers that love you. They want to buy more, but they tell all their other friends that are in the same job or whatever, or in the same vertical about it. And you get this real big halo effect. So
get ready for the Product Tea with Leah, your fun-sized dose of business, tech, growth, and product chatter. I'm your host, Leah, and it's time to spill the tea. Ladies and gentlemen, hold on to your entrepreneurial hats. Today's show is a 2-for-1 special. In the left corner, a maestro in the art of investment who can smell a tech unicorn from miles away and has been doing it for only 15 years as a partner at Notion Capital. He's the guy who shines a light behind the scenes of the tech stage, Chris Tottman. And in the right corner, the B2B value proposition sniper, pinpointing and polishing messaging until it shines like a beacon in the SaaS world, turning maybes into yeses, Richard Blundell. Together, they have written the go-to-market handbook for B2B SaaS leaders. Good morning to you two, and welcome to the Product Tea. How's it going this morning?
Yeah, love that intro. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, made me smile.
It's really cool. Right. So, yeah, we already were comparing teacups this morning, so that's really good. Mine has Supergirl on it. Chris has one with a robin on it.
Well, I've just got Ribena.
Yeah, and Richard just has a glass. Okay, so the holder of the Robin Cup, can you introduce yourself to the unfortunate people who do not know you yet?
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Tottman. I am the founder and GP of Notion Capital, a VC firm in B2B SaaS in Europe that we founded in 2009. So yeah, it's great to be here.
Hi, Richard Blundell. I am a co-founder at Venture. We work with some fast-moving B2B SaaS businesses of various phases and stages. We have one unicorn we work with right the way down through to early stage seed, pre-series A. And our mission is to help those businesses become the best version of themselves. And our obsession is probably, customer pain and building an armor-piercing value proposition in a world where selling software is, quite complicated.
Armor-piercing. You are an artist with words, Richard. That's what I appreciate about you. So we can talk about this a little bit, just in a bit, because, you're using this talent for good measure as well. Chris, there are 2 questions that I ask everyone on this podcast. So you go first. So what do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
Oh, well, I think probably because people have preconceived ideas where people, the roles that they have, probably initially they think that I'm extremely smart, that I'm really competent and very diligent. And I'm probably none of those 3. I think my generalized IQ is about 122, which is pretty average. And I left school at 16 and got into work. So no further education, no elite education. And I'm wired slightly differently. So I'm a really big divergent thinker, not a convergent thinker. So I kind of look at everything about the options that are available rather than consolidation of that information. And so it would be hard for me to be an expert in something because of the way that I'm wired. So I tend to be a super generalist. And then I hire really, really diligent people and I try and, work with them to fulfill their objectives. And that gives me quite a lot of scale. So when they meet me, they're kind of thinking, why does he not get into the detail? Or I was expecting something different from this guy. And so I'm full of surprises, basically. So, and that can be quite painful to work with.
That's interesting. So you think it is about people expect operational advice into the details and you're more on the strategical first principle level? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I try and create frameworks that make things super simple. So try and look at things that are very complex and then try and think about them, not only in terms of very simple terms, and prioritize, well, what needs to happen in order for that to actually really become a thing or a reality. So the sort of prioritization of sprints, what needs to happen. And so I can reduce that down, if you like, a little bit. So, in a board meeting, there's a lot of material, but I'll only ever be worrying about one or two things that are the major things that need to happen in order for, the year or the 2-3 year plan to sort of go well. And if they don't do that, they're not, then it becomes diminishing returns. So I'm kind of linking future information, and I tend to live not within the present, which, can be difficult.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can relate to this with my dyslexic brain. But before we talk about that more, Richard, what about you? Like, what do people get wrong about you?
I've thought about this a lot, actually, because you sort of primed us this question would come in. I think lots of people think that I'm an extrovert. And I think that what they get wrong is that I'm probably very close to being introvert, or certainly on the, right on the margin between extrovert and introvert. I have to find peace, tranquility, and no noise in order to sort of recharge my batteries, to think deeply about whatever we're working on at that time. And I think that's probably what's changed as I've got older. I think, in my early days, I was very instinctive, very extrovert, very, I can only think when I'm talking kind of person. And I've become a much, much bigger reflector as time has gone by. And I think if I was talking to my 18-year-old self, I would teach myself that lesson that I've learned now later on, earlier in my career, because I think there's a huge amount for taking on board a load of information, reflecting deeply on it, and then going back, hopefully with some wisdom to, your friends, your family, or the people you're working with that you thought about really deeply. Yeah, so I think when people meet me, because I do quite a lot of public speaking and podcasts and that sort of thing, I think people assume I'm an extrovert. I can be the life and soul, at the right party, but actually I'm actually quite deeply introverted. I think that's the bit people get wrong about me.
This is very fascinating, because I've had about 50 guests right now, and almost all of them were senior leaders in tech in some kind of way. And almost 90% of them, I would consider them good speakers, right? Like, I've either seen them on stage or just know they have good personalities. They're used to like speaking in front of people as well. And most of them actually say that exactly what you just said, people mistake me for an extrovert when I'm actually an introvert. And what I think is so interesting about this, also like in a business context, is that we seem to be really bad in judging what people want for them. Because when you get misjudged, then, like as an introvert, people are just like, they keep talking on you, right? Like, but you had enough, right? Like, but you cannot signal it to the outside in some way. And I find this very interesting, because we're really good in analyzing past business performance, but we have no idea what people actually want. So I guess it's never getting out of fashion to actually talk to people and put in some kind of systemic approach to user research and figuring out, am I selling now to introverts or extroverts, whatever your material is.
One of the single biggest lessons I learned in my business career was with a guy called Paul, who was my CTO when I was the CEO of a technology business. Deeply introverted, deeply clever, capable of creating some unbelievable technology. And I was in a room with him, and we were under pressure, we were missing target. And I didn't know at that stage the right skills to talk to an introvert. And I was asking him when the product's going to be live, and I need to know now, and can you tell me today? And please come back to me and let me know when we can get this out and we can start selling it and hit targets. And he looked at me absolutely blankly, and it didn't matter the more I shouted or the more impassioned or the better language I used. He just looked at me completely blankly, and the sort of meeting ended. And that afternoon, I told this story to a coach who was working with me, and he went, well, of course he can't tell you the answer straight away. He's an introvert. Introverts have to have time to go away and reflect and think. And if you'd said to him, could you come back to me in 24 hours and tell me when this product's going to be live and what it's going to be in it and what's going to happen, he'd have gone away and come back and done a brilliant presentation to him. But the more you shouted at him, the more you demanded an answer in that particular moment, the less likely you were to get one. And I think if there's anyone in your life who is an introvert, you need to remember that they need time to go away and to think and to reflect before they can come up with an answer. And I think it's the cause of lots and lots of conflict between extroverted people, introverted people, is that the extroverts want the answer now and the introverts cannot provide that.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And I want to circle back to this. So like in your intro, Chris, you said that, you're one of the founding partners of Notion Capital, which is one of the few funds that I actually work with. So I've never talked with you about this, so let's see where this goes now on air. But I'm very glad that you funded this entire spiel, right? Because I really love working with you guys. And one of the things that actually happened a couple of weeks ago is that I got an intro from a company I was talking with the founders and so forth. And it ties so beautifully into what just Richard said. And one of the questions was that, okay, so, so how should our first sales hire look like? Right? So like, who should be taking over sales? Because we try to move up market and all that kind of stuff. And my usual question is always around, well, it's maybe not so much like who you should hire, but like you as a founder should start to become the first salesperson. I'm strongly a proponent of founder-led sales, at least at the start. And then he just tells me in this call, like, hey, I'm an introvert. And our entire tech world, all these businesses that we have, like everything has been built for optimal kind of character traits, like the introvert CTO, the extrovert salesperson, or the extrovert marketer and so forth. And now it seems to me that at the same time, I'm asking people to just like, you have to get uncomfortable. You have to look into the other silos, and kind of look at this more holistically. And this has been kind of my vibe that I got from Notion as well, because you're like very good at like, assisting companies, like to look a little bit in the broader picture for companies. Is that too much of a tangent, Chris? Or like, was this really like a little bit also of the funding thesis in some way for Notion? I don't know. I don't know that story actually in detail.
Well, I think the origin story for Notion, I think is, quite straightforward. I mean, we built the first and biggest generation 1 SaaS business in a company called Message Labs, which is in messaging security. So at the bottom of everyone's emails today, it says scan by. And before, we all connected to the internet in the 90s and computers started to become networked and connected, a bad actor would need to get into your infrastructure to sort of steal your information. But now they could hide malicious malware in email and press send, right? So we had email and spam, which was a payload for viruses. And so we figured that out first, and we created this company, and that grew to be kind of $150 million SaaS business over 8 years with like 20,000 corporates, 10 million users, I think, paying users. And so we sold that to Symantec in 2008, and we announced Notion the next day. So we were sort of pregnant with Notion for some time. And the thesis was that B2B spend on SaaS was about 1% of B2B spend. And if you're a SaaS founder at that point in time, you can only really see the world where the products that you build, buy, that get delivered reside on the internet, which is, at the early stages of software as a service. So we felt that would go from 1% to 50% within our business lifetime, and a portfolio approach would be better. So we created Fund One, which was $30 million of our own money, because we knew that it would take a couple of years to raise Fund Two, but it was just, we were in a hurry. And so that's how we kind of started. And we really wanted to be these sort of value-added investors that had operational experience that could, help them with some of the bumps in the road and stop them flying off some fast bends. And that was the premise to start Notion. And, 15 years later, here we are with, 7 funds and deploying Fund 5 and so on and so forth. So part of it is then being able to deliver on who you are as a person and what you believe that you should be doing. You sort of, when you join a new industry, you kind of learn the playbook, and then you start to throw bits of the playbook away, because it becomes your variant, your version of what it is that you think you should be doing and how that market should be addressed. And I think with a founder operator led fund like Notion, you have quite a lot of founder empathy. You've walked in the footprints, you've in their shoes, you've made loads of mistakes. I mean, you are covered in mistakes and cuts and bruises. And a VC, if they are nothing else, they're an aggregator of fuck ups, right? So, I cover over 200 investments at the moment, do an investment every week. And what that means is all of those problems that are going on in that mental monologue for the founder, at some point it's going to end up in your inbox. And then the more investments you do, the more mass inbound problems that you get. So you kind of have to decide, are you going to build infrastructure to help founders resolve some of the challenges that you've got? It's incredibly narcissistic to think that you can help them yourself in many of the challenges that they will have. And so that's kind of how we then started to build this kind of value-added infrastructure for founders. And then you meet many from our team, like Stephen Millard and Andreas, etc. Really great team that we've assembled. But there's this sort of broader network of people that you have to allow them to sort of tap in. And we're allowed to do it because I think we're entrepreneurs, but also B2B. A lot of companies in B2B have similar problems at different stages. And so they can peer-to-peer connect to kind of solve those problems. So that was the platform bet that we made in 2012, which is now kind of half of our team. So
I think this is super interesting because for two kind of reasons, right? So like I had Jason Fried on the podcast relatively recently, who's like from the other side. So like, you know, as a strong believer in bootstrapping businesses. And we have this current, like this discussion going on in the public, let's call it that, you know, like versus like VC versus bootstrap and so forth. So I think it is a good discussion to have. And I would go as far and say like, I'm more of a moderate person in the middle. I always say like, it depends, but I have a very clear kind of boundary. This is very interesting because you two have been writing a book on this topic as well. So like, let's make a circle to this. It is interesting to me that we have shifted from this kind of like VC gives money and then is kind of pulling out and is going away to VCs actually have a distinctive advantage that they have to leverage to make their investments more successful, which is you see much more businesses than the average founder ever will in their lifetime, to kind of pattern match and also see like, hey, what worked over there in this business? What worked over there in that business? As you said, you can also connect founders with each other because interestingly, we still have not solved the basics of running a business successful, which is back in the days, you said it yourself, right? Like we had the SaaS revolution, everything became kind of more transparent. We started to wise up. We had everything in the cloud and so forth. Nowadays, I feel like we're going through this kind of watershed moment again, where we go through product-led growth, you know, like you have to kind of figure out, so like, how do I structure my go-to-market strategy and so forth? Like, how do I get the basics right? And what I still see, and I feel like this is so interesting because you're also touching on this in your book, and maybe Richard, you can also give a short summary in this regard, is we still make so many basic mistakes. So I was very afraid when I got into advising 2 years ago that, hey, you know, like at some point, you know, like I have to be so good at this, but like I'm still coming into the same businesses. I still see kind of the same mistakes being happening. And that doesn't mean that the people are incompetent. It's just that it's very difficult for a founder to be a good tech leader, a good product leader, a good marketing leader. And most of all, once it does work, a good go-to-market leader to scale all of this.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah. And well, I think the first line of the book is, this book has been written for people we regard as heroes. And that is, you know, the founders of B2B SaaS businesses. We've been founders. We've sat in the chair. We've raised money. We've blown a sales budget. We've blown a marketing budget. We've fallen into some massive potholes, some massive man traps. It's like the old story of the guy walking down the street who falls in a massive hole and he can't get out. And his priest walks past and says, priest, help me get out. And the priest says, sort of writes a prayer on a piece of paper and throws it in the hole. And then a doctor walks past and says, you know, doctor, help, can you get me out? And the doctor writes him a prescription for what he'll need when he gets out. And then his best friend walks, you know, down the road and jumps in the hole with him, you know, and our guy says, well, what have you done? You know, now we're both in the hole. And his best friend says, yeah, but I've been in this hole before and I know the way out. And I think that's a story that kind of, you know, frames the book in terms of where we're at. You know, what we write about in the book is pretty basic stuff. I mean, when we were writing it, I was thinking, oh God, no one's going to read this because they've heard it all before, or, you know, these are some quite old ideas, but it's because we keep making the same mistakes. And I just really wanted to pick up on a point you made when you were just talking to Chris just now. When a founder comes to you and says, look, I'm not a good salesperson, you know, I'm not a salesperson, I'm a founder. This is somebody, and we spoke about this with Paul Fifield in the book, where we wrote the whole workbook on when and how to hire a sales leader and a sales team, which is, why is it that founders who have gone out from a clean slate and raised 5, 10, 15, 20 million pounds from some really hard-assed, frankly, sometimes horrible people, you know, who give them an incredibly hard time, and in exchange for, I don't know, 10, 20%, 30% of their business, have received a massive check of money by any imagination, believe that they're not salespeople. I mean, they've just made the greatest sale of all time. When are you ever again going to make a 1 million, 5 million pound sale? That, you know, that's incredibly unlikely. So from a very, very difficult market and from very, very difficult times. So we always say to the companies we work with and to the founders who say they're not salespeople, you've done it. You've done it from scratch. You've built a presentation, you've built a value proposition, and you've received a check. So don't worry about that. And what we encourage people to do is, rather than be an extrovert salesperson or an introvert salesperson, be an empathetical salesperson. You know, empathy is an emotion that, you know, the greatest salespeople in the world are GPs, doctors, right? Everyone turns up. Everyone takes their advice. Everyone goes to shop and buys what they've told them to buy immediately, and everyone feels better down the line from doing so. But how does a GP get that empathy? By asking lots of questions, by sending them for tests before they display their products. You know, you don't go into a doctor's surgery and the guy says, "Oh, I'm glad you just come in. I've got some green pills, some red pills, and some blue pills. Which one would you like?" You think, what kind of, snake oil salesperson is this? They ask lots of questions, they empathize, they understand, they listen. And that is the number one lesson in sales: is if you're selling a solution to solve pain, and we obsess about customer pain. So someone's working in a business and is frustrated that they've got a process that is 3 decades old. They're wasting time, they're wasting money, they're going through horrendous one-to-ones with their team who are fighting because their process is broken. And you turn up and listen to that, and you listen to their pain, and you understand their pain, and you find out how that pain manifests itself in their organization, and then play back what looks like and feels like a bespoke solution, even though it's exactly the same software, just deployed in a different way. And that person gets noticed in the business, or gets promoted, or gets their bonus. That's the kind of salesperson I want to be. And everybody has a gift in them to be empathetic, particularly in the world in which we live today, to understand other people's problems, to listen more than you talk. And it's not about introvert or extrovert. It's not about clever or dumb. It's about empathy. And that's why people's best relationships are often with their doctor or their priest, or someone in their family, a mentor who genuinely listens to where they're at. So yeah, I mean, to round off the intro to the book, we wanted to write a book from a founder's perspective. We've been in that hole. We felt that pain. We've mucked it up far more times than we got it right. We learned way more from the ones that went wrong than the ones that went right. And we just thought we'd share these stories on a kind of sort of wide and thin basis. We didn't write a book about one good idea and then pan it out for 300 pages. We wrote about hundreds of good ideas, but on a thin basis, basically saying to our readers, if you'd like to find out more, for free, anytime, pick up the phone, email me, get on LinkedIn, email Chris, email Paul. We wanted to write something really, really useful for founders who were lost and who didn't know where to turn, and just wanted, something to read that would stack the odds in their favor of doing well.
No.
Well, we used to joke back in the day that, and founders have actually got an advantage, particularly those that are more technically minded product managers, is that the salespeople, the more junior, or particularly the extrovert ones, they have a problem where they do this thing where we call it premature articulation. And product and engineer people are far less likely to just blurt stuff out, right? And so it's like they're far more likely, product and engineering types, to do exactly what Richard said, is to ask questions and think more deeply and clarify their understanding in that engineering mindset about the customer's problem and the challenge and how that might integrate with something else, and who else does this relate to in the organization that it would also impact, and stuff like that, far more than just projecting, or as I would call it, premature articulating at the customer. But actually sometimes it's just giving them the confidence, the permission, right, to say, do you know what, as Richard said, you've already proven to be very, very good at getting people comfortable with what you do and how you do it, because you've raised some VC money, you've raised some angel money, and that's the bedrock of a skill set, if you see what I mean. And it's just playing it out in front of customers, which is far less about broadcasting and far more about detailed understanding of their needs before you then propose a product. So I think the origin story on the book was actually related to your original point, which is people constantly making this kind of similar mistakes and stuff like that. And at Notion, we have this phrase around founders, which is looking for founders that solve the new problems that haven't been solved before. And they and us we able to create enough information where, they're not making the same mistakes that have been made over and over again. But that is the sort of reality. And I think I remember when we were on a Zoom and he just said, we keep giving this free advice and we have these deck hacks and we keep, it becomes a little bit routine. So you become a little bit bored with yourself, that you're saying, hey, have you thought about positioning it like that? And, getting them, say, for example, investor ready. And Richard said, I'm going to write it all down. And, you kind of go, oh, yeah, Richard, go, write it all down, do a book, thinking that's not going to happen. And then Paul and I didn't really wait. We didn't expect anything to happen. And 2 weeks later, the two chapters arrived. And then, of course, thinking, well, this is going to be a first draft. It's going to be a bit rubbish and going to need a lot of work. Anyway, I read both, and I was like, I felt the emotion because there's these visceral stories that exist within the book, which are quite funny. And obviously they're part of our history. So they strike a chord. And it was like, Richard, this is really, really good. This is really good. And I think that was the encouragement he needed to say, okay, I'm going to stupidly, spend the next 3 months getting this all down. So when I reflected on it, I'm currently spending or sponsoring the spend of like 200 million a year across all my investments on a product roadmap, right? 200 product roadmaps, people burning their way through time and credibility and money and stuff like that, trying to figure out whether they get to product market fit or not. It's just like, actually, when you think about it in broad terms, the sheer number of capital that's going in that founders and their teams are trying to sort of figure out, like, how do we get product market fit? What problem are we solving? Are we solving a meaningful enough problem? What do the feature set look like? How do we price? I mean, the numbers are just extraordinary. I mean, we see 1,500 companies a year. That's a huge amount of money that's being burnt out on the street, right? And so the ability for us to sort of say, hey, look, let's put some time into this. Let's try and create some information and learning that we can get out at the lowest price point where we do stuff that's for free and in the book. In reality, it just felt like the right thing to do. And I'm glad we got there. And I'm glad most of it was Richard's writing, because he's certainly the best at the writing, I can tell you.
Yeah, he's gonna write my book. That's gonna be for sure. Richard, you don't know this yet, but you're gonna write my book for sure. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. First of all, Richard, we have to go back a couple of minutes. So first of all, I would like to see the doctors that you mentioned are good salespeople, because I don't agree with that at all. I think the metaphor stands. It makes a lot of sense. But the doctors that I know, they're not good salespeople. The only reason why I go to them is because they're close and I have no other choice. So I just wanted to throw this out there. Not everyone has amazing doctors around like you do. So having said that, just like as a funny quip, I think it is interesting to understand from the perspective of VCs, even if you do not go into any VC meeting and you're never standing in front of investors, the thing that goes off as an advisor or as someone like you, Chris, that is seeing a lot of pitches in front of them, and you, Richard, as well, right? So you know that when you talk to someone, that there is a by far higher chance that the business that is standing in front of you is not going to exist in 5 years rather than it becoming a success. So we know this already, right? So and this is not about saying like, oh, most people are failures. In this kind of context, depending on the stage that you're going in, you're looking at a ratio of like, hey, there's a 1 in 40 chance that you're going to hit it off really big. You might become profitable a little bit more likely, but that you're going to hit it off is very, very unlikely. And I love what you said about you are raising money, so therefore you are a good salesperson. I would flip this around a little bit in the sense of what I see when people are preparing how to present their business towards other people, like really sitting down and also like going through the numbers, because oftentimes when they prepare these slides, it's the first time where they actually look at their metrics, whether you believe it or not, right? Like they should have done this way before, but it is just an uncomfortable exercise of looking into the mirror. Is our CAC really 10 months or is it actually 14 months? How can we prop up the numbers a little bit? And if you've been in front of hundreds and hundreds of these meetings, you know which slides are bullshit and which ones are not. But let's assume you get the numbers done. The way that I always look at this, and this is fascinating to see for me also for a lot of younger founders, is that your metrics are to evaluate the present and be honest about it, right? So like just be honest about them. They are just like to get you into the minds of people. The reason why people invest into you is because of the people, right? And the character traits to do things that are uncomfortable, because we all know you're going to fail anyways. The question is, can you get yourself out of the hole that you were falling into? It's exactly like you said, also, Richard, in that sense. And this is where I'm saying that if you can prove to me that you are okay with doing uncomfortable things where you're not an expert. I'm not hiring you because you're a great product person, because that thing I'm never kind of worried about with great product leaders. But I'm starting to get worried if someone says like, no, I'm not doing the sales thing, or like, no, I don't want to do this particular thing that I'm just not good at. I never want to touch this. I think people really underestimate this. Like also, if you look at how the slides are structured, you should have much more about you, even if it sounds weird. Like the founding team, like how did you approach specific challenges, and why are you the person that is going to maybe not know now how to scale the company, But if there's something going to come up that is going to burn, you know that you are going to go into the uncomfortable zone and try to dig yourself out at any cost, because that's what it takes, probably always. Yeah. So not sure whether you wanted to add something to this, Richard, because I know you wanted to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that, like you share your vision with a VC and you've outlined your vision, and Chris will answer this better than me, but I think, the first thing Chris looks at is, have they found a problem that is worth solving that no one's solved before, number one. And number two, are these the right people to navigate their way through the next journey? If you drive a car without ever looking at the instruments, how much petrol you've got in the car, how fast you're going, how slow you're going, where you're going, how the hell are you going to know when you're going to get there and if you're going to get there and all that sort of bit. So that kind of bit comes later. But I think, the job number one is this a pain worth solving that hasn't been, solved before? And are these the right people to do that? And that's why we always start every conversation with the value proposition. And it frustrates me so much that I every day see incredible technology that genuinely solves visceral customer pain that is not articulated to anything like the strength that it needs to be on the deck, on the website, in the sales PowerPoints, in the in the messaging, the messaging that's there. And I think Chris will probably laugh at this, but how many times have we looked at decks on slide 14, we've gone, oh right, yeah, I've got it. Yeah, okay, I can see your magic now, but I had to, I don't know why, but I went through 13 slides to get to number 14. And it's the same on company websites. If I see one more website that tells me what you do rather than why you do it and the impact that you have on an organization. And we talk about old ideas, but if you don't watch Simon Sinek's, start with the why video at least once a quarter, when you're looking at your value prop, then you're mad. That's the original idea, but the best way of articulating that idea. So I think, your early clients need to see the same vision that they need to understand your vision and buy into your vision the same way the VC does. And who better to explain your vision than you? Who are you going to trust who are you going to hire to download the thing that you've dreamt up for the last 6, 9, 12, 18 months? You cannot download that to anybody else because they just won't have the same, they don't have their whole life in it like you do. They don't have everything, their ego, their money, their mum's money, their everything. It means everything to you. And you need to download that passion onto your first clients and they will buy into that. So my point would be, if you're worried about selling, just go and tell them your vision. Listen, be empathetic and explain to them why this is the dent in the world you want to leave. And be empathetical with them, and you'll be stunned about the effect you can have.
Chris, did you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I think that the sort of number one problem is going back to what Richard was saying is like you get to slide 13 and 14 and you're a member of the audience, right? You're in a VC room with 4 or 5 other people, maybe 6 or 7. They've all got slightly different buying criteria that are going around in their head. They may have a business that's currently going bust. It has got a very critical event going on. So the inner monologue in their head isn't in the room. It's actually somewhere else. As we know, you could look at maybe 2 of them are actually on their phone when you're pitching. So there's a lot of this stuff going on in the room. But it gets to slide 13 or 14. They're 28 minutes into the pitch and no one has a clue why they should be excited. Yeah. So, once you kind of get the slide decks together in the sort of standard normal formats that many, many free sources on the internet would recommend that you do, the biggest problem is why listen, right? Why should these people in the room, as an audience, listen? And so they're buying something different. They're not buying the product. They actually probably, some of them don't even care what the product is, right? Whether that's right or wrong, right? What they really care about is, can they deploy some money? And are there a set of circumstances that enable them to create a very, very large business, an extraordinary one-off type of business, a generation, once in a generation lifetime business that then can return them a multiple value of that check, a fund returner of some description. So that's them as an audience. That's the sort of, their monologue in their head, if they are listening, will start to go around that. And so you're absolutely right. Team is a massive factor. So the earlier the business, the more you have, the little you have. So what you're really thinking about is product, founder, problem fit. You're thinking about the team composition. You're thinking about the scale of the market. And so, most founders are bouncing off VCs because the TAM is too small. As an angel, those are the ones that I really love because I have this thesis called super niche businesses, which are like unbelievably cash generative at small levels of scale. And then the numbers are sort of like a combinatory factor. They can add a little bit of sizzle. VCs really buy into growth. So, is this a 4x fund, a 5x, 6x fund? Are they just not really listening unless you're a 4, 5x a year sort of growth fund? So, but you're going to make logical people do an illogical thing. You're going to get them to switch off their thinking and tap into their emotion where they feel like, God, she is unbelievably smart. She's been cutting her teeth in this area for so much time. And the way that she's articulating the scale of the problem and how she's solving it, really does something to them. It's a feeling, goosebumps are happening. And then it's like, okay, so which stage are they at? The numbers are telling me that they've got some demand. They've got some design customers that are really kind of impressive logos, but they seem really disciplined about their roadmap. The market could generalize into being pretty big. And, then, there's lots of nodding and leaning in, and as well as VCs asking some stupid questions, which we always do, unfortunately. So, but it's not telling us about the product.
Yeah. So I want to add a couple of things to this because I like how romantic that you just like formulated all of this, which is absolutely true because you would think that when you're younger that everything becomes more professional as you get older. It's actually not true. The only thing that changes is we're just very good at kind of formulating it in a way that it doesn't look like the absolute chaos that it is. And I want to make 2 points about this. So the first one is there was a great report that OpenView has been preparing with Paddle together about, so where the industry is going and so forth. And exactly what you said is the case in 2023. We're seeing a lot of outliers, positive outliers when it comes to vertical SaaS. So I've been also saying this for almost a year. If you go into niche solutions within AI, where it is much, much easier to build products around the same amount of markets, then of course you're going to see a much more fragmented market, like you have much more solutions for the same kind of problem area. This is no big surprise to anyone in any way. What I find very interesting is that I have been fortunate enough to be an early stage employee in 2 hypergrowth companies when I was way too young and way too inexperienced before any of this actually came up. And the interesting thing is, if you think about what was going on behind the scenes, because I have been there from employee 15 to 90 when we actually sold the business. If you look at, so I knew about the realities, right? So like I knew about the numbers. I knew about what happens if you talk to investors, and what's being presented on the other side. If you just take the amount of time that was invested overall by me, by the rest of the leadership team in kind of like preparing these slides and trying to get the chaos under control so it looks good on the slides. Because I can tell you, at some point, we were growing so fast, the only key metric that we knew about is how much cash we have on bank. There was no mention of CAC, net revenue retention, churn, nothing. It was just like, there's this much money in the bank. I think we can hire someone else right now. And I think that's kind of fine. And this is what I would always tell also like younger people. This is not the exception. This is exactly how it goes for every business that goes fast. And don't invest so much time in kind of like fixing the chaos to make it appear like you are running a professional shop. Because people like us who have seen probably a lot of variations of chaos are going to discover it a lot. And the interesting thing is, if you have a chaotic business with a lot of optimization potential and the numbers look good, that's a good investment. That's a really good investment if the founders are willing to also change, right?
Yeah.
Like if they're open for, hey, this is exactly what a good investment is. Because everything that you just said, Chris, right? So like, hey, you have a founder that has a very niche kind of teeth in a very specific problem that you would have never thought about. All of this is defensible. Once we fix the business, that's a good investment, because a good investment is only a good investment if it is better than other investments that are trying to do the same in the same market. And that's what I always say, that you don't invest so much time in like propping up your business in, like dressing up the bride and so forth. We're going to see it anyways. Just be honest about what can be changed, because that makes for a good opportunity to actually invest. And yeah, that's kind of like my frame of thinking when I advise founders and earlier stage companies.
Yeah, it reminded me of the Unbabble Series A. So I invested in like quite a large seed round, and Unbabble is in sort of language translation. It's a sort of state-of-the-art AI company in Lisbon, and we're now at Series C. But it went out for the Series A, and we don't necessarily recommend this to founders because we do want them to professionalize their information. But I think your point is well made and true. But when they asked for the data room, Vasco would say, well, we don't quite have a data room. We have like a data cupboard because, we're moving really, really quickly and we're heads down on the business and stuff like that. So they kind of manage the expectations, which is like, you're going to get just enough information to make your decision, but we're not spending all of our time on the kind of like materials and stuff like that. And so they found a way to sort of like package up the information and the materials that they've got in a nice phrase, which is data cupboard rather than the data room. So your story reminded me of that.
Yeah. I think ultimately when we see what makes a successful business, there's not a single business that is successful that did not have a lot of chaos behind the scenes. But at the same time, we kind of try to always appear perfect in some ways. So I think this will not change. AI will not make us perfect. Never, like a successful business will never be automated because then you cannot make money with it anymore because then there's too many perfect businesses. So I think fundamentally the struggle between founders and them kind of realizing how much of a mess all of this is, that will never end. And I think looking forward, this is why also these books or forms of knowledge where we try to kind of formalize advice are always going to go back to either case studies of like, what someone did, or it's going to be more around first principles thinking. I'm a big fan of like this kind of first principle thinking that you're also employing, both of you, also in the book, where you just like, look, here's the ton of failures, right? But like, here's how it could look like if it is really successful. And it's not about, this is this one framework that you need to do, and then you're going to be successful, because that's just seriously not happening. And yeah, you can just not, you cannot apply what happens in one company to your company because every one of them is individual. But if you can identify from a first principles perspective on what worked there, then you might be able to apply it on the other side.
It's really interesting actually about the book when you get feedback, and we've had, we sold, hundreds of copies now, and it's in sort of 14 different languages. And what's lovely is when people come back to you and they DM you or they message you and they ask for more information or some clarification. I always ask them, in the book, and there's 10 workbooks in there, right? So there's hundreds of ideas that's in there. What were the 2 or 3 that really stood out? Because each one of those workbooks should probably be a book on its own. We wrote 4 workbooks with industry professionals. Andreas from Notion, who did the pricing and packaging workbook, invaluable advice that we never had as found. When we were doing it, we never had access to this kind of thinking. Paul Fifield, when and to hire your salesperson. And fascinatingly, in that workbook, the first person you hire is not a salesperson at all. Interesting enough, I won't spoil the book, but his thesis on that is absolutely fascinating. But the 2 that always jumped out is that people say to us they'd never seen the concept of a pain statement visualization. So, the old expression, a picture paints 1,000 words. Well, rather than use 1,000 words, let's create a picture. Let's create a flow that grows, animates, and you can use whatever platform you want. But it starts with your buying persona at the beginning, and it explains their world. It explains their internal actors and who they work with, and it explains their external actors, customers, the regulators, the revenue, whoever it might be. And we draw in the flow of what's happening, of that broken process. And make sure we capture not only the old hackneyed phrases of time and money, because that's ROI, right? And where money's being lost and time's being lost. But we get them to lower over that personal pain. Stay awake at night, 3 a.m., stare at the ceiling, pain. Why is this so bad? Am I going to get fired if we don't ship our goods quicker? If we don't price our goods properly? If we don't, that's the pain that we're trying to get to, that level, the top of Maslow's hierarchy of need. So people always reflect they hadn't seen that before, and actually creating that pain statement internally amongst the chaos you were just describing. When businesses either go a little flat or sales aren't happening, the first thing to do is to get the team around the table and say, what is our value prop? Is it this? Are we solving this problem or this problem or this problem? Or are we just praying and hoping that we solve one of them by doing that? And by getting it right internally and then updating your messaging internally, you've got a far better chance of your customers not being confused, which is why your marketing is falling on deaf ears about what you do. So that was number 1. The pain statement visualization was something people fed back to me they hadn't seen before. And the second was the kind of, to use an old phrase, the market map Facebook, where everyone's built market maps before, but we take it to another level where we actually build a picture or an image of 300 faces of actual targets on the wall. These are people that we need to be speaking to, we need to be addressing. You have to be able to visualize those people's faces in case you meet them. And in fact, the odds of you meeting them, and I'm not, sort of one of these sort of theoretical universal people that if you shout their name into the universe, they'll rock up. But the odds of you meeting somebody will increase if you've actually visualized who it is you want to get to. And there's 7 degrees of separation and all that sort of thing, which can actually get you there. But, why is it top sportsmen like motor racing drivers spend, 10 minutes before a race visualizing that race, that bend, that where they're going? An athlete at the end of the 100-meter sprint will be visualizing what's going on. And I'm using the word visual a lot, probably because I'm a highly visual person, but we find that if you can visualize the problem you're solving and you can build a Facebook of the kind of targets you're trying to speak to and get a hold of, because you can change their lives, it massively stacks you on in your favor. And they were the 2 big takeaways from the book.
So here's an interesting point, and I would love to hear both of your inputs on this. So I think there are 2 fundamental ways on how you can miss your market. Either it is too big, what you're trying to address, and you're trying to address too many people at the same time, or it is too small, right? So like when we go into VC funding, we always talk about have at least $1 billion somewhere, like the TAM needs to be big enough and so forth. Okay, that's understood. So I had a product-led growth cohort, which finished last week. And the one segment in there that had the most questions and that had the most interest from people was actually about ICPs, so ideal customer profiles. And this is also along the way where I'm always talking about, hey, let's not use personas, for instance, right? Like I'm a big fan of using use cases. So instead of saying like, okay, like this is the buyer so-and-so in this particular company, it's like about, okay, so like what do they do? Whatever it is, whatever you do, whether you do ICPs, whether you do personas, whether you just like try to narrow down the problem focus, it's always about the same thing. It's about creating focus. It doesn't matter whether you're a good driver. It matters whether you are a good driver on this particular track that you're going to drive. And the more you know the track, the less your general skills to kind of adapt to situations as they come up will matter. And it is interesting to me how in practicality, how afraid and panicking people are, because it's not just about getting to know the market, but to say like, we're not going to go for the other side of the market. So a very typical scenario is I come in and I say, let's sit down and make a very narrow ICP definition and close these before we go anywhere else. And in principle, they are all game. They're always saying like, that's cool, let's go. Then we sit down and then we have this first definition. And then the sentence comes, yeah, but Leah, do we really have to go this narrow? Can we just not like open it a little bit more? Because they're really afraid of saying no to the others. And then when I try to sound smart, I kind of just say like, look, it is better if you perfectly address a small market first, like this land and expand thing, rather than miss your entire market half-assed, because this is what makes you inefficient in the end. But I see this so much, right? Like I think 99% of business failures are because you're too broad rather than being too narrow. It's very rare that you have to shut down a running business just because they're not addressing a big enough TAM. Because if you address something, it's easier to just expand afterwards, right? Like you can still enhance your TAM most of the time.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
So many. I mean, I think one of the taglines on the book is uncomfortably narrow. It's something we talk about all the time at Notion and at Venture. But I think also VCs don't help here, right? Because it's paradoxical. So the VCs are the ones that need the very large TAM, right?
Correct.
The customers don't care.
Exactly.
And in fact, if you are addressing a narrow challenge, then the founder and the product people and the engineers and the sales team, they shouldn't care either. So what happens is we know that if you have a very well-defined ICP and you know them extremely well inside out and you address them in a certain kind of way, you're going to be incredibly efficient in terms of marketing CAC and sales CAC. And so all of the product dollars that you've spent is going to get consumed more by customers and generate revenue. And that's your starting point. Now, of course, when you then go and speak to the VCs, you then want to be able to communicate that you can then broaden out into this generalized market that is very, very big. And so I think founders also get lost between the 2 points. And, that's why, in many regards, why we started to really sort of noodle down on this kind of super niche investing, because, there are so many incredible businesses that don't get VC money that are incredible opportunities, both from the founder and the product and the customer's perspective, but then also for particularly angel investors. And we're up to about 6 or 7 of these deals, and they're just remarkable, because the bit of that story, which is they're highly efficient, the CAC's amazing, both on sales and marketing, and the customers love them. What happens is you get this word of mouth. You get these super consuming customers that love you, they want to buy more, but they tell all their other friends that are in the same job or whatever, or in the same vertical about it, and you get this real big halo effect. So I think founders have also got to be careful about, who are they building this company for? They're certainly not building it for me. If I'm a VC, if I put the VC tag on, they're building it for those people that they're going to serve. Customers ultimately are the big stakeholder that need to be satisfied, delighted, so that they kind of talk about how they've found this incredible vendor and team of people that really understand what they do and how they do it. And they're getting increasingly more efficient, and the customers we feel like we're winning on this technology. How frequently does that happen? It's so infrequent. And I think when you've really got a tightly defined market, it is easier to do that. It is much easier to do that. That's my contention. So I think you hit on a stellar point, really do.
Yeah, I would add, before you can be all things to everybody, you have to be something to someone. And I could not agree with what you just said, Leah, about how difficult it is when you sit with founders. We do this every day, saying we need to get you narrower, we need to get you narrow, we need to get you more uncomfortably narrow. And you can see it in their face, sort of white face, well, hang on, but that's too small a market. And it's like, look, we're not saying we're not going to respond to one of the businesses that comes from outside of our narrow focus if they approach us, and they almost certainly will if our messaging's right. Of course, we will take them on as customers, but our focus is going to be on the 300 or 400 companies that we can impact the easiest, speed to value, quickest. We know it works. We know they've got the pain. We've tested our thesis. We're absolutely happy with that. And just backing up on what Chris just said, you've got to go from raise to real life. And it's here where the sort of VCs have a responsibility, because you spend, a year raising money, or however long it is, burning through too many hours and too many versions of your deck, talking about your TAM and your SAM and your SOM and all the rest of it. But when you come back into the real world and you've been given the money, you have to look at the match between small resources versus massive market, right? You do not have the resources to fight a battle on 8 different fronts right now. You only have the resource to win, one country at a time, like the board game Risk. You have to win one before you can get more armies and go and take on more. And you've got to get out of that mentality that you've been with the VC and get narrow. Product market fit for me isn't that 25 customers bought your product, although well done for doing that. It's 25 to 50 successfully implemented customers who are absolutely thrilled by how you've changed their life. You've hired your CS person to check in that you've established value along the way, that you are saving them time, that everything integrates, that everything works, that the dashboard is working. And here's my sort of takeaway from this bit, they have a WhatsApp channel. Your customers have a WhatsApp channel with all their other mates who do their job in other organizations, right? They might have met them at a show. They might have done an event. But there's just an industry chat, right? They've got this WhatsApp channel with 25, 50, 100 people on it, which are people that they are talking to about the industry. And if you can get your product into that WhatsApp channel by someone saying, wow, has anyone been working with these guys? They're absolutely fantastic. That is the sort of dark social that you need to be focusing on. So before you can make everybody happy, just make 50 businesses happy. And believe you me, if you make those 50 successfully implemented, the odds of you getting to that A, Series B, Series C or whatever are massively increased. You have a much, much better chance of doing that. So yeah, that's what I would say on that. I think we couldn't agree with you more on get narrow.
You just hit on a very cool point that I'm super passionate about. So a couple of weeks ago, Y Combinator was putting out a video between Dalton and Michael, and they were talking about which kind of startup ideas are you tired of? And the one thing that they said is that, well, we're getting pitched 10 times a week about startups, about social networks, like the next Twitter or the next something. And what you just said about word of mouth is very, very powerful. And I agree with this. And one of the reasons why social network ideas have such a hard time of getting invested is because it makes exactly what you just said very, very hard. Because for a social network, like anything of that sort, you need to have a critical size that is big enough, which makes it already quite hard if you want to scale this afterwards, right? So like the market is overfarmed and so forth. But what you just said is very interesting. So instead of like pitching another social network that just does it a little bit different and a little bit better, if you know in your specific target group on where they are happening, like on which kind of technology form, like which kind of platform, or like if you don't know this, then you already have a problem. So to give you just an example, someone was asking me recently, so I work a lot with VCs, like someone asked me, so like, hey, what is your favorite tool, like that you kind of learn, or like, what was the one thing that you learned? And when I work with VCs, the one thing that I learned is all VC business is happening on WhatsApp. If you are not ready to whatever you want to sell to this particular industry, like your slides are shareable on WhatsApp or whatever, you're not going to happen. At least it's definitely true for most of the European VCs that I've been in contact with. And just this technology choice is going to be there. If you offer some kind of solution for VCs or whatever, like to connect that is not happening on WhatsApp, you're going to be dead because you do not know your market. You do not understand your market. And every industry is so particular about these things. Like you have doctors hanging out on TikTok and other stuff. If you don't know about this, then you cannot design a solution that is going to get anything done because you don't understand your customers and their habits.
Yeah.
So it does matter. It does matter greatly whether you know your customers before you start and before you choose your technology and or at least your platform that you're going to happen on with your product. But I love this so much because there's so many particularities to every subculture or vertical that you just would never assume. And yeah, this is a stone that can go wrong.
It reminds me of when we were first selling back in the day. I mean, Chris Paul and I met, 28 years ago in London, and we were selling, and we found this massive chemistry between the three of us that has lasted, nearly 3 decades. But when we were learning to sell, and it's amazing how rarely you hear this these days. I used to hate cold calling. I hate conflict. I just do right against my kind of passion and what I wanted to do. So I had to get very, very, very good at asking for referrals because that was the only way I could get new business to come in. And I think the art of asking for referrals has died somewhat on the vine in the modern world, right? So if a really good friend of yours approached you, Leah, and said, look, I've got this new product that I don't know what the product is, but I've got this new product, I'm set it up, I'm getting started. Is there any way you could share information about my product with your friends and family? Where's the first place you would share it? It's WhatsApp, right? You go on there and you say, hey, look, my friend set this business up. Here's the link. It's amazing. These guys, when you ask your customers for referrals, rather than getting out a phone book, literally a book in their pocket, or a filer fax, remember those? That had all their numbers and details and email addresses of people they wanted to refer you to. It's now all done on that channel. And if you think your customers don't have a WhatsApp group with all the peers in their sector, in their space, you're mad. That's the place you've got to get onto. And the only way you get onto that WhatsApp group is if they've had an incredibly successful implementation that has saved them tons of time or money, because your client wants to get the kudos and the credit of you solving it for somebody else, down the line. So yeah, it's a fascinating. There's probably a book there all on its own, isn't there? How do you get onto their WhatsApp group? How do you get onto their WhatsApp channel? And it's exactly the same with VCs. I'm sure Chris will tell you.
I think the bit where you get high word of mouth, that Richard is bang on. It's like, and Leah, you get this totally. And it's that you built a product that people love, right? And it solves a real pain that they go, wow. It's like all senior leaders in businesses have got a whole stack of problems that are killing them. And, they need to prioritize which ones they solve. You solve one of those for them and they'll love you. And then they'll tell their friends about it. So it comes back to that, all of the work that's done in understanding customer requirements and the problem that you're going to solve and how you're going to solve it. And I think, like Richard and Paul particularly, kind of they've noodled away at customer development conversations more than anybody else I've kind of ever met. Paul's great product guy. Richard is too, but then Richard is this kind of product marketing guy, which are like so rare in Europe. We underinvest in product marketing in Europe. It's fascinating. It's like the Americans, I think, invest 7 times more in a typical software business in product marketing than European software businesses. It's a research that we did a while ago at Notion. So I think there's that kind of interesting combination. And so all I kind of think about in these terms is like, everyone's built these lean canvases. We've got like hundreds of lean canvases that are out there. And then people are trying to figure out, how do I test that what's on my lean canvas? is real. Well, that's the customer conversations. That's the mum test, right? That's the really dwelling in there. And I think once you do those two things right, which we cover a lot in the book, then you're increasing your odds of getting to that point where you get a product that really flies, that your audience really, gobbles up with glee, and then they tell people about it in terms of all these different channels and stuff like that, and all the stars on YouTube Cloud and blah blah blah. So I think that's the key bit. It's people quite too frequently kind of jump to the end to get high word of mouth. Message Labs had a 30% word of mouth score. So we felt that 30% of all of our sales came from word of mouth. How we spent time, how do we industrialize that? So we're in how do we turn this into, an industrialized system so we get word of mouth? But it's, if you're understanding how you get high word of mouth, it really comes from the bit. So go slow to go quick, or go slow to go viral, or go slow to go high word of mouth. It's dwelling in that areas of really thinking about the fact that you've got a product that really hits the mark for those ICPs, personas and stuff like that. Get that right, bang, you're off to the races.
I think this is a really great point. I want to make just one asterisk to this as well in terms of what product market fit is. It's not just about whether people love your stuff in a big enough market. It is also whether you're communicating it on the same channel, because or the correct channel. Because if you don't have that, then you're going to stop word of mouth, no matter how good your product is. And a very, very good example of this is that I was talking to someone in the most niche thing that I've ever encountered, which was semiconductor supply chain management. And we kind of tried to figure out, where is that particular business happening? And we kind of found a huge blog on Substack with an incredibly high subscription cost and so forth. But if you wanted to get your information, you had to be on this particular thing. And you cannot just sit down and think this up. You have to do research. And then once the first person says something, I read it on this particular blog, the second and the third one, then you're like, okay, something is actually going on there. And this is just so important. This matters much more than whether you use PHP or Ruby as the language to actually build your product or whatever. This is knowing where you sell your stuff. Just as much as some markets just have regional differences that would blow your mind. For instance, if you do not happen on WhatsApp, you're not going to sell in LATAM. That's just what it is. Don't care how good your product is in America. If it doesn't happen on WhatsApp, you're going to be dead in the water. And these things are just learned by just going around in the world. So it's been also definitely a really big journey in this regard. So I just want to really bring this now briefly to an end. And I wanted to ask you both one more question, because we've been going over for over an hour. Richard, maybe starting with you. Is there some kind of trend that you are betting on, aside from the generalistic go-to-market things and so forth? But is there some kind of trend that you are excited about, either personally, professionally, or whatever, that you think is going to hit this industry, that's coming up, that you're passionate about, that you want to talk about?
We're working with two businesses now in very different fields who are operating with large language models and the effect that can have on an organization. One is an incredible tool in the recruitment space, which is using a large language model to sort of find the real value behind a CV. Because if a CV is anything, it's just a pack of lies. It's either a pack of lies or it's hugely exaggerated, right? And if that is the only measure on which someone is being hired or making it through to the face-to-face, then the world's got a problem, because there's a huge amount of people who don't have a CV, who find it very difficult to write anything down, but who have incredible talent and incredible ability behind them. And they're using this large language model to uncover genius, out of the array of CVs. And the other one is equally niche, like your semiconductors, is an organization we're working with in Aberdeen, who are using a large language model to help the massive backlog of maintenance and repairs that needs to happen on ever-aging real estate out in the North Sea, where the problem is coming from the engineer who's probably hanging off a rope in a storm trying to tell you what's going wrong with where it's at. The ability to use a large language model to question the inspector about what's wrong and where it is and what color it is and what nozzle is it and so on and so on and so forth, to improve that multi-billion pound problem, which is the massive backlog in where it's at. So I'm fascinated by large language models and what they can do. I have to say, with sort of AI more generally, I think the jury's out a little bit at the moment, because I think most customers I speak to know they need to be doing something, but aren't sure what it is, and are kind of waiting for the market to settle down a little bit. And I worry about AI as a creative person, I worry that, AI will never be able to do what Shakespeare did or what Picasso did, or what it can copy it. It can do a near like, but there's a big difference between playwrights who are like Shakespeare and Shakespeare, or artists who are like Picasso but aren't Picasso. There's a huge difference in that. So it worries me personally, but I would say with AI, customers aren't sure yet how they're going to deploy it. And actually, they really need to talk about the business issue, which is the why, not the AI, which is the how. So I would really, from a messaging point of view, keep solving the business issue. Don't over-index on, are we clever? We've got lots of AI. So that's where that's my answer. Yeah.
What about you, Chris?
Well, as a contrarian, and I'm looking in the kind of completely opposite direction where I spend most of my day looking. So instead of looking for unicorns, obviously that is my day job, and Notion are brilliant. We've got team of 30, more than 30 that are, and all of everything we've built for the last 15 years is out for that. But it's the 99% of all the other decks that we get. It's looking for the seams of gold in there. So I kind of referred to it a little bit earlier, these what I call these super niche companies, and these could be, Message Labs was going after every single company in the world that was using email. That's a pretty broad, large target list. These are companies that are the opposite to that. They might only have 400 customers that they're going to be selling to. So, for example, I've got one that is in social housing in the UK. There are 400 main social housing companies, housing associations. They spend $1 billion on sales and marketing. And the person at that company and all of the consumers that are trying to get onto the property ladder are having a really terrible time. I've got this great angel who says, I really look for opportunities where two people within the market are having a really shit time. And if you can solve that, then you can create liquidity. So I've done one in alternative asset space, which is in super rare classic cars. It's the second highest performing asset class in the world. It's as big as the art market in terms of transactions per year, but it's completely fragmented. Can they become the liquidity provider in that? I think this business, in the 6 months since I invested, is doing $1 million of GMV and profitable. And it's raised less than $1 million of capital. So I'm looking for, when you grew up in the 90s, you're always told, it's the old school of thought, which is get big, get niche, or get out. And I'm really, really fascinated about these niche businesses where there's something going on with that niche which creates this hyper efficiency. You're doing something in a certain kind of way, you're solving a problem in a certain way, and then your consumers become super consumers of what you do. They buy more, they start to buy more quickly, they start to buy more product as you meet more unmet needs, and there starts that kind of flywheel effect where you become the kind of category king within your particular space. And these are businesses that, like, the team, it's nothing like a winning strategy in a company, right? That's the big cultural effect, So those are the things that I'm super interested in, because I've got a lot of guns pointed at the outlier big space. So I'm noodling away at trying to think about what's the investment model for these kind of hyper super niche businesses that are incredibly efficient. And so, that's the bit that's kind of whizzing around in my head at the moment.
I think this is a beautiful way of ending this episode, because I think we're in a very privileged position that we see how other people are thinking about problems, because that's fundamentally what a business is. And I love nothing more than just like hearing someone tell me about how they're solving something that I had no idea that did even exist. And I think that's such a privilege as an advisor that also works in this kind of space. So thank you so much, both of you, for this episode. This was absolutely amazing. It will be in the show notes on how you want to be contacted. And yeah, thank you so much. So this was it for the Producty. Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you so much, Chris.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. I've taken 2 actions, which is to write a book with you and get you a better doctor.
And that's what we're going to do. Boom. That was it for today. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to The Producty with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.